Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bloomerang Academy. We're so glad that you could join us today. As you're joining us, if you would go ahead and pop into the chat and let us know where you're joining us from and what the weather is like where you are. Today in Indianapolis, it is a balmy 48 degrees and sunny. The birds are singing and it feels like spring. I had to check my calendar to make sure that it wasn't indeed spring. So, but we're glad you could be here with us today. This is our dial-in number should you need it. We're going to drop that into the chat in just a moment. If you lose audio or if you lose internet, feel free to use that number to keep hearing all this information today. A couple other housekeeping items. We do have a live transcript available. Should you like to access that, please look on your toolbar and click. You'll be able to see subtitles. A couple other things, as you're doing right now, please engage in the chat to share with us any kind of information that might be really useful. Best practices, maybe you've used Zapier before and you want to talk a little bit about that. Feel free to drop that in there to share it with other participants. However, if you have a question that you really want to have answered, we'd love for you to drop that into the Q&A for us, please, so that we can see it. It gets distinguished and pulled out separately so that we're able to address that question. The resources mentioned in today's session will be shared with you along with the recording and the slides later this afternoon. You'll receive an email with all of that information, so you don't need to write down any links or anything like that. Should we not get to answering your question live during the session today, we will follow up with an email after the session. So please don't worry if we're not able to get to your question exactly today. And if you need any further assistance with your Bloomerang database, please don't hesitate to reach out to our support department at support@bloomerang.com. They're really amazing and very helpful. We really encourage that. So today we are very fortunate to have Jesse Gilchrist with us. We are going to be talking about Bloomerang and Zapier, automating data collection forms to Bloomerang. Jesse Gilchrist is our instructor today with Sidekick Solutions. And Jesse, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Perfect. Awesome. I'll go ahead and steal the screen share here too.
Great.
Okay. Well, excited to be here today, everyone. A little bit about us at Sidekick Solutions. We are a Bloomerang partner that specializes in system automations. So we've been a Bloomerang user since around 2013, and we're part of the team that launched the Bloomerang Zapier app. So I love hopping on these webinars to share some more insights and use cases of what you can do with Zapier. We've got a lot coming here today, so I'm going to go ahead and stop my video so that you can focus on the demos we're going to do throughout the presentation. But I'll be monitoring, again, as Margie said, I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A throughout the session. So if you have a question, feel free to throw it in there and we will fit it in. Or cover it at the end during the Q&A portion. So the goal of today's webinar is to show how you can use an external app for your data collection forms and leverage Zapier to automate the sync of those form submissions to Bloomerang. Zapier can support your operational processes and efforts by reducing the time you spend performing data entry and ensuring consistency across coding and Bloomerang, which will improve your reporting outcomes as well. So we're going to start by introducing Bloomerang and Zapier, how they work together and why Zapier integrations are a key feature of your Bloomerang system and fundraising strategy. We're going to demonstrate how you can use the Bloomerang Zapier app to save time and energy by automating those form submissions into your Bloomerang database. And specifically, we're going to explore use cases for event registration forms, volunteer applications, and legacy or planned giving interest forms. And then we're going to wrap up by talking about how you can get started with Zapier integrations for Bloomerang. So as I mentioned, we have demos throughout the webinar to show you how you can set up these automations for your organization. And again, happy to answer questions throughout the presentation today, as well as at the end where we should have a little bit of time. Now, it's common for organizations of all sizes to use many different types of software, and we believe that automated integrations are essential to your donor database. Integrations can help connect the systems you're using and creates a tech stack that supports your organization and its strategic goals. And this is where Zapier comes in. As some of you may not be familiar with Zapier, we're going to start with a high-level overview of what Zapier is and why we believe it's a key feature of your Bloomerang system and how it can support your fundraising strategy. So Zapier is automation software that enables additional Bloomerang integration and fundraising opportunities. It's sometimes helpful to think of it as a middleware that sits in between Bloomerang and other apps you use, helping them talk to each other. So the Bloomerang Zapier app extends the power of your database by enabling integrations with over 5,000 other apps in Zapier's directory. And Zapier is a no-code platform, which means that it really was designed for anyone to build an integration. You don't need to be a developer or know how to code to set up your own integration. And the flexibility of the Zapier platform enables custom integrations, meaning you aren't limited to a one-size-fits-all workflow, mapping, or formatting. You can really build an integration that is perfect for your organization and your use case. Now, integrations are a key feature of your Bloomerang database and can take your fundraising efforts to the next level. The best way to think of it is that data should flow in and out of your Bloomerang database, connecting the other best-in-class tools your organization uses. By keeping Bloomerang as a central hub of your tech stack, you can create a global record of constituent engagement with your organization and centralize your reporting efforts. Now, just to get a sense for if any of you are using Zapier right now, we want to do a quick poll to see how many of you are currently using Zapier. Or perhaps this may even be the first time you've heard of it. So go ahead and let us know in the poll so we can get a sense for where everyone's at.
We have almost everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Perfect. So it looks like about half of you, this is the first time you've heard of Zapier, or maybe the first time you've heard of it, but you've never used it. And we've got a couple of you using Zapier right now. Perfect. So for those of you that are new, hopefully that little overview was helpful, but I think the demos today are going to shed some more light on what Zapier is and how you can use it as well. Now, when we use the term data collection forms, we are talking about any form on your organization's website or hosted online by your organization to collect information from your constituents. Now, for today's webinar, we're going to focus on web forms that do not have a payment processing component, meaning they're pure just data collection forms. If you're interested in learning more about syncing donations from a fundraising page outside of Bloomerang, I recommend exploring the other Bloomerang and Zapier webinars in Bloomerang's Academy, as we've explored a number of different fundraising or payment processing platforms on our past webinars, and those can provide some additional context as well. So again, today is focused on forms that are purely just data collection forms, whereas there are some other webinars that we've done that you can look at in Bloomerang Academy that focus on fundraising and online giving pages. Now, Bloomerang itself offers a suite of web forms that can be configured directly from within your Bloomerang database. These forms are free to deploy, easy to set up, and are templated for a variety of purposes. Specifically, Bloomerang offers web forms for online giving, event registration, email sign-up, volunteer activity, and constituent information. These forms can be hosted by Bloomerang or self-hosted and may be embedded on your organization's webpage. Now, for those of you, maybe you're a new user to Bloomerang or you're just exploring Bloomerang, if you want to take a look at Bloomerang's online web forms, you can go to Settings, and go to Website Integration, and you'll see the different sections for the different types of forms you can set up in Bloomerang. Now, for some organizations, these forms are a great place to start, as they offer a direct integration with Bloomerang that requires no configuration and no external automation tools like Zapier. Other organizations may be looking for more robust web form functionality, and this is where Zapier can be supportive. Indicators that an external web form app may be beneficial for your organization include the need for conditional logic, enhanced graphics or design, the ability to assign additional coding in Bloomerang that is not collected on the form. So it's not a data point that your constituent is actually entering in the form, or to even streamline the user experience for lengthy forms. So the ability to save and return, have different pages when you're submitting forms, really just kind of streamlining that user experience. So our webinar today is going to use Jotform as the online form application, but the flows we are going to explore can be deployed and automated using a variety of web form applications. So common form applications include Jotform, Gravity Forms, Ninja Forms, Wufoo, or even something as simple and free as Google Forms. And a quick search in Zapier's marketplace will help you determine if the app you currently use or are exploring using is available for integration on Zapier's platform. So if we go to Zapier.com, Zapier.com/apps. It's going to take a second here. Apparently it's really thinking. This gives us Zapier's directory. So Zapier.com/apps. You can then go ahead and again, search for the form app you want to use to make sure it has an application in Zapier's marketplace. And today we're going to be using Jotform as our form app. But again, there's dozens and dozens of options here in Zapier that you could use for automating or for collecting those form submissions. Now, we chose Jotform for this webinar as it is a powerful online form tool that allows anyone to quickly create custom online forms. It does offer, similar to Zapier, a no-code kind of drag and drop user interface that really simplifies form building and provides a lot of functionality options for organizations to deploy different types of forms as well. So let's dive into some common use cases for data collection forms. The first use case we're going to focus on is a web form designed to collect registration for a free eventer program. So again, we're not doing a paid ticket or a paid registration. This is going to be a free eventer program. And for this use case, we're going to say that we are going to be setting up a registration page for a donor recognition dinner. So in this flow, after our submission of our Jotform, our workflow is going to first search for an existing constituent in Bloomerang. If an existing one is not found, it'll then create a new constituent. And then an interaction will be created in the timeline of the founder created constituent. So a very short zap here. You'll see that the other use cases we're going to walk through here later in the webinar are actually going to build off of this flow right here. So this is going to be our starting point. Now, before we dive into Zapier, I want to show you what the form in Jotform looks like that I've set up to collect these registrations. So we're going to hop over to Jotform here, and I'm going to open my event registration form. Now, I actually built this from a template. Jotform has a big library of templates for forms. So I actually just searched for different event registration templates and chose the one that I wanted to use. So this is actually a page through form. I'll show you what the live form looks like here in a second. But this one provides, again, a stepped through process where the user is presented a couple different pages and they click next to proceed to the next one. On the first page, we're collecting the information for the primary registrant. So their name, email, phone number, and address. Name and email are the two required fields. Phone and address are optional. And then we've got a second page where we are confirming how many people will be attending with them. And then they can give us any additional comments as well. Now this is, and you'll likely see this across all of our use cases, a very lean form. For the purpose of today's webinar, we're trying to keep these relatively lean and straightforward to show the functionality in Zapier, but you would likely have additional questions or maybe different data elements that you'd be capturing on these forms as well. So if we actually look at this form here, I'll show you what this looks like. So we've got our landing page that looks pretty. Again, this is for a donor recognition event. We would fill out our information. Oops. Say I didn't want to provide my phone or email. I could enter how many people are attending in any comments, and then submit my form. So again, a page stepped through process, collecting different information on each page, and just some additional graphic design elements to really create a different user experience with that form. Now, once we have our form set up in Jotform, the other piece we need to have in place before we set up our Zapier automation is to make sure that we have the appropriate custom fields set up in Bloomerang to capture the data that we are collecting on our form. So let's go hop back over to Bloomerang, and I'm going to go to settings, and I'm going to go to interactions because I want to make sure I have the correct custom fields set up on my interaction record. So when we create our interaction right here in Bloomerang, I can code some key details for the event. So you may want to create, if you don't have one already, a new category of custom fields on that interaction called event management, event participation, whatever terminology you'd like. And you can see, I'm going to move this deactivated one down here. You can see that we have 3 custom fields set up right now. We have participant status, which is a pick one. And we are going to code these again with registered or attended. This will allow us to see who registered for events but didn't actually attend. So this is with the assumption that once the event occurs, we'd be going back into Bloomerang and creating interactions for those individuals who actually did attend the event. So we've got our participation status. We have the name of the event. So this is going to support reporting in Bloomerang, where we can see all of the registrations we have from Bloomerang's reporting utility. So you can see I have a value here for my 2023 donor recognition dinner. And then the last field I have here is just a free form field where that number of attendees is going to be synced into. Again, to support reporting in Bloomerang to see how many attendees we anticipate attending that donor recognition event. Now, optionally up here, you'll see under general that I have a custom field called type. This is an optional field, but we use this often to distinguish between different types of interactions, again, to make it really easy to report on them. So this is just a pick one field on our interaction where we can designate if this interaction is an event registration, a moves management action, planned giving interest, if it was a volunteer application. So it's essentially being used in conjunction with the purpose that already exists on the interaction, but allowing us to create some custom values that might help us to, again, segment or report on these interactions easier in Bloomerang once they've been created. So again, for the event registration form, there's 3 key fields we're using: participation status, the event name, and the number of attendees. So now that we have our field set up, we can go into Zapier and set up our automation. So I'm going to go back to Zapier here. And I'm just going to click my Create Zap button right here. I'm going to name my Zap. Oops. This is our new form submission for our donor recognition dinner. So when we get into Zapier, every workflow in Zapier starts with a trigger, and the trigger is what prompts the integration to run when that event occurs. So in this case, we want to trigger on a new form submission in Jotform. So I'm searching and selecting Jotform as my app, and then my event is going to be a new submission. So every time that submit button is clicked on my form, it's going to cause my automation to run and pull all of that data through. So once we select our app and select our triggering event, I'm going to go ahead and choose my Jotform account. And I'm going to choose the form that I want my automation to trigger for. So I don't want to trigger it for my planned giving or my volunteer application forms. I want to trigger it for my event registration form. The next step, once we've selected our app and event, chose our account and set up our trigger, is to test our trigger. This will return up to 3 recent submissions, and these are samples only. They won't actually run through the integration because they were created before the integration is turned on, and Zap triggers run in real time only. So I've already submitted a test through our event registration form for the donor recognition dinner. So I can click test trigger, and it's going to pull that submission. Actually did 2 earlier. It's going to pull those submissions in, and I can use them to set up my mapping in Zapier. So you can see it gives me this full payload of data that I can use to help me set up my mapping in Zapier. And I can choose between the up to 3 records that it gives me. Now, once we have our sample data, we'll add our first action to find or create a constituent in Bloomerang. So in our action here, we're going to go ahead and search for Bloomerang. And we're going to choose our event, which is to find a constituent right here. I'm going to choose my Bloomerang account. And I'm going to start by choosing what type of constituent I'm searching for. And based off of this form, we're going to be actually searching for an individual. So I'm going to go ahead and map. You can see that it's presenting me with all of these different fields coming from my form submission. Some are kind of system data elements that Jotform generates, things like the created date, the ID of the submission, the IP address it came through. But it is also going to give us all of the other data elements. So I'm going to map my first name, the data elements that were captured through the form, my last name. You can see that it also is giving me full name. But in this case, we're looking for the split of first and last. So we've got our first name, our last name. We're going to map in our address lines, our phone, and our email. Now, it's important to note that the Bloomerang Find Constituent search isn't looking for a match across all of these fields. It's looking for a match of name plus at least 1 piece of contact information. So if your form wasn't collecting address or phone, that is all right, as long as you have email in there. So again, the search is looking for and requiring a combination of name plus at least 1 of these contact information elements to try and match to an existing constituent in Bloomerang. Now we're going to keep these 2 options right here to include the cumulative giving history and the household information. We're just going to leave those blank. They don't apply to our use case here, so we can just leave those empty. When we get down to the bottom, we are going to check the box that says create a Bloomerang constituent if it doesn't exist yet. So what this is going to do is it's going to pull up all the fields that we would use to create a new constituent. And if this search doesn't match an existing constituent in Bloomerang, it then will use all of this data we've mapped down here to create a new constituent account. So same as we did above, I'm just going to start mapping in my data. So I've got my first name and my last name. And I'm going to come down to my contact information. So I'm going to say my primary address type. These are home addresses. So I can map in my address lines, both address line 1 and address line 2, if there's data there. And pull in my city. State. Postal code, and my form is set up only to collect United States addresses. So I'm going to hard code or tell the system that this is a US for a country, because the Jotform isn't returning that because I've set up my address field to only be for a US address. So I'm just going to tell my automation that United States is the correct country. Now for my email type, same thing. I'm going to choose my email type and map in my email field. And then the same for phone. So you can see here, we now have this constituent record that would be created if our search did not match an existing constituent. Now, once we've mapped the elements in our search as well as the create constituent action, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and you can see there's all of these different custom fields we could map to as well. Obviously, we have a lot in our sandbox here for Bloomerang, but if you have additional custom fields you would want to code, you can code those as well if you're creating a new constituent. So I'm going to go to my test action, and I actually want to click text action. And so this is actually going to try to search Bloomerang for that existing constituent, and if not, it will create a new one. And the reason why we need to test this step is because it's going to return a payload of data that includes an ID for that constituent that we need to use in our next action. So we're going to click test action. And you can see Zapier showing me that it's testing it right now. It's trying to search and find one. And it tells me it was successful. And you can see all this information that was returned. In this case, it matched to an existing constituent. And you can see all of this information that was returned for that constituent. So it gives us all the information for that constituent in Bloomerang. So now that we've set up our trigger and we've set up our find create constituent action, now we need to set up our create interaction in Bloomerang step. So let's go back to Zapier, and we are going to scroll down to the bottom and click the little plus icon to add another action. Same as above, we're going to select Bloomerang as our app. In our event, we're going to choose create interaction. So this will create an interaction in Bloomerang. Select my account. Now this is where the find create constituent action comes into play. This constituent dropdown is going to list every constituent in my Bloomerang sandbox. Now, we don't want all these interactions to be added to the same constituents timeline of Bloomerang. Instead, we want to make sure that it gets added to the constituent that was found or created in that prior step. So we're going to click in this field and click custom. And then for this find constituent in Bloomerang action, we are going to map this ID field. So this is a unique ID for each constituent in Bloomerang, similar to an account number, but it's what's used in the backend code of Bloomerang to identify a constituent account. And so that ID, again, is what is going to tell our automation to create this interaction for that specific constituent. We're going to map the date our form submission was created as our date for the interaction. We're going to create a subject. So I'm going to call this registration 2023 donor recognition. So you can see that I can do a combination of mapping dynamic values from prior steps in our automation, like we're doing for constituent ID and date, as well as what we call hard coding, meaning we're typing in a specific text string we want to assign, or we're choosing a specific value. So for example, for this donor recognition, we're going to say that this is a purpose is a special event, and the channel is this came through our website. You can see that we can, again, dynamically code some values on that interaction, or we can say all of our interactions created through this automation are going to get the same subject, same purpose, the same channel by selecting specific values there as opposed to the dynamic mapping. We're going to map our comment field from our form submission to our note on that interaction in Bloomerang. And again, we have that type field, which was optional, but we're going to go ahead and code this was an event registration. Our participant status is going to be registered. I'm going to choose my event name, so that 2023 donor recognition dinner. So these are my custom fields here on that interaction. And then I'm going to map the number of attendees that was submitted through that form. So again, this is going to dynamically return and make sure that number of attendees is returned on that interaction in Bloomerang. So we could go down and click test action, and it would create this interaction in that constituent's timeline. Now, I did one earlier today, so I want to go ahead and show you what this looks like once it actually ends up in Bloomerang here. So you can see we have our date of today, which is when it was submitted, our subject. In this case, I submitted it with a comment that said test. We've got our purpose and channel. We've got that type, and then we've got our event details here. So it creates this interaction record where we've got those additional details for the event. And these are data elements that we could pull as columns in a report in Bloomerang if needed. And even filter in that report to say, show me all interactions with an event name that's 2023 Donor Recognition Dinner, in order to see just those registrations for that specific event. And in the slide deck that you'll get following today's webinar, there are screenshots of those steps we walked through. So if you're furiously taking notes, again, not only is the recording going to have the demo, but the slide deck will also have screenshots of those different elements we are working on here together. Now, the next use case we're going to focus on is a web form designed to collect details for individuals who are interested in volunteering. This flow builds off of what we did for the free event registration, because ultimately it's going to find or create a constituent in Bloomerang and create an interaction. In addition to that base flow, there are two other things that our automation is doing. First, we have two steps that are formatting multi-select fields on our Jotform to the appropriate format in order to assign each of those selected values in Bloomerang. And then we also have a step at the end to update the constituent in Bloomerang, if an existing one was found, with any new contact information that came in through the form. So we didn't do this in the event registration flow. This could have been added. But what this allows us to do is to say, if the constituent would match to an existing one, let's make sure the name, the phone number, email, and address we got through that online form is added to that constituent's account to make sure we have the correct contact information for them. So you can see it's a very similar flow. We just have some formatting at the front end and a new update constituent action at the back end. So let's start like we did last time. Let's go to Jotform and let's look at our volunteer application or volunteer interest form. So again, another really lean form. This is another one we pulled from Jotform's template library. So you can see it's got some different graphics and formatting that can be customized for your organization. But similar to our last form, name and email are required, phone and address are optional. And then we've got two different multi-select fields to capture which days of the week the individual is interested in volunteering and what areas they're interested in volunteering. So again, fairly straightforward lean form, but allows us to demo this here today and show you some of this functionality. Now, similar to what we did for event registration, we want to make sure we have custom fields set up in Bloomerang to capture this availability and interest. So we are actually going to do this a little bit differently than what we did for the event registration form. So we're going to go to settings, but instead of setting up interaction custom fields for these data elements, we actually want these to be reflected on the constituent's profile. So we're going to click constituents up here in order to edit our constituent custom fields. You can see right here that we've got a volunteer info category. Again, you can name this however you'd like for your organization, but there are three key fields that we have set up. The first one is our interest, and you can see this is a pick multiple or a multi-select field. And our values in this field match what we have on our form in Jotform. So the 5 different options of where they're interested in volunteering. And the same goes for availability. This is another pick multiple field with the same options we have set up in Jotform. Now, optionally, because a constituent may fill out your volunteer application more than once, we have just a date field here where we can map the date of the most recent volunteer application. So if someone filled out our application in 2015 and then they fill it out again now in 2023, This would allow us to see what the date of the most recent submission was really quickly from that profile. And that update constituent action is going to make sure that our interests and availability reflect that most recent submission as well. So we'll talk through how to update those fields when we get there. But that last application submission can sometimes be helpful for pulling that date really quickly into a column in a report in Bloomerang. So now that we've demoed our form and our custom fields in Bloomerang, let's hop into Zapier and set up this automation. So I'm going to go ahead and just click the create button to create another Zap. And same as before. Oops. We're going to name our Zap. And we're going to search for Jotform. And the trigger setup is going to be exactly the same. The only difference is we are just going to select a different form. So new submission. Select our account. Select our form, our volunteer application this time. And then we're going to test our trigger to pull in a recent submission. Again, when you're setting up your automation, if your form is brand new, you may need to go in and submit the form yourself with fake data in order to have a submission to pull into your automation for mapping. So you can see I did that. This is, again, just fake information as we've gone through. But I submitted these prior to the webinar so that we could pull them in as our test here. Now, once we have our sample data, this is where we're going to do something new. We're going to create these two formatting steps that we need for those multi-select fields coming from Jotform. So the first one that we're going to do, these two steps are actually going to be nearly identical. The only difference is going to be one is going to be for our interest field and the other one's going to be for the availability. So we're going to go to our first action and we're actually going to choose Format by Zapier right here. For the action event, so Formatter by Zapier is a free utility in Zapier that allows us to perform different types of conversions or transforms on the data that's being processed in our automation. So we're going to choose a text event. So we're going to work with text. We're going to click continue. And for our transform, we're going to choose split text. So down here, there's a split text option. Now, the only place where these steps are going to differ is the input. So the input for one of these is going to be, and I'm actually going to rename this. Ability. So the difference in the input is just going to be the field we're pulling from. So the first one's going to be which days of the week do you want to work? That's going to be our availability. So you can see Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now, Jotform, when it returns multiple values that have been selected, uses a semicolon with a space as the separator. So the separator right here, we're not just going to put a semicolon, we also need to put that space in there so it can tell that there's a semicolon and a space between each individual value. Now the segment index, this is how we want to output each of those values when we split them. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose all as line items. So what this is telling, or what Zapier is doing here, is it's saying instead of these three values just kind of all listed together with a semicolon separating them, it's saying split on that semicolon and then reformat them as and treat each one as its own unique item. And what that allows us to do is that when we then assign those in Bloomerang, it makes sure that each of those items gets assigned on that constituents profile, or each of those values gets assigned. So we're going to go ahead and test our action. And what this is going to do is it's going to create the output or the reformatted version of that field that we can then use in mapping in our subsequent actions. So I'm actually going to take this step and I'm going to duplicate it. because we want to do the same thing for our interests. So the other multi-select field we have. So I'm just going to rename my Zap. I'm going to call this interests. And the only change I need to make here is just my input field. The separator and the segment index, everything remains the same. I'm just going to choose which multi-select field we're reformatting. And then I'm going to test this one to pull the reformatted field out. There we go. So we now have an input in both of these steps that we can use in our automation. So if we go back to our flow here, we've got our trigger set up. We now have our 2 formatting steps. We can now do our find create constituent in Bloomerang. So same as we did in the other Zap, we're going to come in here. Choose Bloomerang. Choose find constituent. We're going to be searching for individual constituents again, as this is the volunteer interest form. And we're going to map in our fields. So we're mapping our search fields first. Phone, address, last name, first name. So same as we had in the other form, again, mapping a lot of those similar data elements, name, address, phone number, email. We're going to check that box to create a new constituent in Bloomerang if an existing one isn't matched to. And again, we're just going through a similar process as we did on the event registration flow by mapping our constituents information that we would want to assign if a new account was created. So when we get down here, map in all these fields. You may be wondering why I'm working from the bottom up. Just a little trick of the trade of, as you can see, when I click in a cell, it brings this pop up. And so it allows me to continue moving up in the list of the fields that I need to assign without that pop-up getting in the way. Okay, so we've got now all of the same fields that we map to in our event registrations app, but this is where it's going to differ. Because now if we are creating a new account, we want to make sure the interests, availability, and last application submission date are coded on that constituent's profile. So you can see if I click in this field, it's going to present me with the individual options we have set up in Bloomerang. But I'm going to click custom, and I'm going to choose the output from my formatting step. Because again, that's going to make sure that in Bloomerang, if it's creating a new constituent, it's going to code administration, events, and programs. We're going to do the same thing for availability. We're going to choose our reformatted option. So we're not choosing the one from the Jotform submission. We're choosing the output from our formatting steps. And then I am just going to map the created date of my form submission as the last application submission date. So we can come down and test this action. And again, it's going to search for a constituent in Bloomerang first and only create one if a matching one is not found. Now from this step, we're going to go ahead and create our interaction. And we're going to do similar to what we did on the last one. We're going to map our ID from our prior find constituent action to make sure we're creating the interaction in the timeline of the founder created constituent. Map our created date as the date of the interaction. Subject's a volunteer application. And then in this case, because we're not mapping the volunteer information into custom fields on the interaction, again, we're putting them at the constituent level. We can do a transcript here. So we could say their interests, their availability, and then their additional notes. And so we can map this information and I'm just searching using the values I know we selected, and then we want notes. So you can search by any field or text string in here to find the field you're looking for. Okay. Oops. That one down here. So you can see we're creating a little bit of a transcript here. And if we were to test that action and create that interaction in Bloomerang, it would create a transcript in that note section, and our interaction would look like this. So we've got our date, our subject, our purpose, our channel. I guess when I'd set this up in my other app, I'd used other. Again, you could use volunteer activity or other, whichever purpose aligns with your organization. We've got our transcript here. And then again, if you're using a type field, you could code that this is a volunteer application. But again, we don't have any other custom field coding beyond that. So we're really just putting those details in the note just as a reference, but that information now lives on my constituent's profile. Now, in this case, as I'd mentioned, our find, create constituent action matched to an existing constituent. So it's not going to update those custom fields on the constituent's profile because this is a find or create action. It doesn't have that update. So what we want to do is to add another step, and we're going to add a filter first because we only want to update if we match to an existing constituent. So this find constituent in Bloomerang action returns a field called Zap data was found. We want to set some filter criteria so that our automation only continues if data was found. So Zap data was found is true, meaning it matched an existing constituent. And once we have our filter set up, we can test it. It'll tell us if we would have continued or not based off of our test we did up here. We can then update an existing constituent. So we're going to choose Bloomerang. And we're going to choose update constituent as our action. So similar to our create interaction, we want to make sure we're updating that same constituent that was found right here. So we're going to map our ID from that found constituent action. So we're going to say, if we match to an existing constituent, we want to update that same constituent. So we can come down. I'm going to focus first on the volunteer fields. So we can code those custom fields and say, if we're updating that constituent, we want to update our interests, update our availability, and update that constituent's profile to show the last date that that form was submitted. Again, optionally, we could map in our phone number, our email, and our address information from that form submission if we want to update those fields on the constituent. Now, it's important to note that on this, I'm actually going to jump ahead my slide deck here for this. On our update constituent action here, when we are updating a constituent, if we do map phone address or email information, it is not going to overwrite or delete any existing contact information in Bloomerang. What it will do is if any of your contact information is new, what it's going to do is it's going to promote the new information as the primary address, phone, or email, and the old information just becomes secondary contact information. So just know if you're doing that update constituent action for the address, phone, and email fields, you won't lose any existing address, phones, or emails on that constituent account. Any new information just becomes the primary. Now we're starting to run a little low on time here. So I'm going to walk through this planned giving one and actually just focus on the one new step that we're adding to this automation. So the last use case here is a web form designed to collect details for individuals who are interested in making a legacy or a planned gift. So this flow really builds off of what we did in the last two use cases. So we have a formatting step for a multi-select field. We are finding or creating a constituent, creating an interaction, updating the found constituent if the constituent was matched to. But the new element we're including is creating a task in Bloomerang for follow-up. So in Jotform, I've got a very basic planned giving form here. So again, another easy one, used a Jotform free form template to get started here. And this form, it'll load for me here, does have a conditional logic piece in it where a field is displayed or hidden based on a response or a previous response in the form. So again, allows some of that conditional formatting in there. Let's go ahead to our form. So similar to other ones, name and email required, phone and address optional, multi-select for the vehicle through which the individual intends to make a legacy gift, estimated value of the gift, and then if the individual agrees to have their name published, we've got some conditional logic where if they check that box, it then asks them how they want their name reflected in print. So again, some conditional logic here where it's going to show or hide that field based off of the individual's selection in the form. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually pull up, since we are running a little bit low on time here, I do actually already have this automation set up. So I want to just step through it together. So similar to what we had for our volunteer application, we have a formatter step, which is taking the vehicles through which they intend to give their planned gift. Taking those multiple values and converting them so that we can update that in Bloomerang. We have our find create constituent action. And similar to what we did on the volunteer application, the details regarding their planned gift status are going to be captured in custom fields on the, and I'm going to zoom in for this, on the constituent. So you can see we have a field set up that's capturing the interest date. So the date they submitted that form and showed interest in submitting a planned gift or in contributing a planned gift. We're mapping the different giving sources. We're mapping the estimated value of their planned gift. And if they did indicate that they're okay being recognized, that name they provided that they want to be published or recognized as. So similar to what we did for our volunteer application, where a lot of that information is being captured at the constituent level with custom fields, we can do the same thing with legacy giving. So we're reflecting that information at the constituent level so that if you want to pull any giving reports or things of that nature, you can still pull these columns in to, again, any type of report you're pulling in Bloomerang. Our interaction in Bloomerang, again, very similar to all of the other ones, and actually mirrors that volunteer application where we are putting a transcript of the submission in the note as a reference. But then again, this information is coded in custom fields at the constituent level to support segmentation and reporting. Now, I do want to touch on the create task real quick because this is one that you may want to do depending on your form. So the create task action in Bloomerang is similar to our create interaction, where we're going to map the ID of our founder created constituent. We're going to choose our channel that the follow-up should be completed through, the user the task is assigned to, the due date. In this case, we can use in Zapier some just narrative words. If you click this little icon right here, it'll give you some options of how you can format your due date. In this case, we just want it to be created for the following day, so it's due tomorrow. I'm assigning a subject to follow up with planned giving prospect. And then I also mapped those details from the submission directly into that task. So my user that's responsible for that task, or my team member, doesn't have to go into the constituents timeline to see the details of that form submission. It's going to be right there waiting for them for when they open that task to complete that follow-up the next day. So I know we've covered a lot today and we've been moving fairly quickly. Again, the slide deck and the recording, I think, will be helpful, especially if there's a specific one of these use cases we covered that really aligns with your organization. Again, within the deck, you'll see screenshots of each of the steps we've walked through. So you can see the different data elements we recommend mapping or updating on those records in Bloomerang. So the next step is really getting started with Zapier. So signing up for Zapier is really easy. It does begin with a 14-day free trial. So you can go to zapier.com/sign up and go ahead and sign up for a free trial and begin playing with Zapier. Again, the use cases we talked through today can be done with a form app like Jotform, or could even be set up with just your standard Google form. So there are free tools available to do some of these automations, but the automations we did show today do require a paid plan in Zapier. So while you may be able to start with the 14-day free trial to get used to the Zapier platform or try building some use cases, following that free trial, you will need to upgrade to, at a minimum, the lowest subscription tier in Zapier in order to turn your automations on. Now, it is important to note that Zapier does provide a 15% nonprofit discount. So I'm going to go ahead and send the link to that in the chat. So if you use Zapier already, or you're thinking about signing up for Zapier, make sure that once you sign up, you go to that link and sign up for or apply for the nonprofit discount, because that is an additional 15% discount for nonprofits. Now, once you get signed up for Zapier, the next step is to connect your Bloomerang account. So once you're in Zapier, you'll go to My Apps, click Add Connection, search for and select Bloomerang, and then you'll be able to authenticate using your Bloomerang login credentials. So just your username and your password in Bloomerang will allow you to connect your Bloomerang database to Zapier. There are plenty of resources available for Zapier. So the ability to, again, search Zapier's marketplace. There are a lot of Bloomerang Zap templates for different common tools or apps that Bloomerang users like to connect. So take a look at the Bloomerang Zap templates there. They're a great place to get started. And then Zapier also has a really robust help center. So if there's different functionality or features in Zapier that you're confused on or have questions on, it's a great place to start. They have great 101 guides if you're just getting started, but just a great resource across the board. If you think your team or an organization would like support setting up an automation for some online data collection forms, we do offer an integration bundle for Bloomerang users. So this bundle includes end-to-end configuration and deployment of your automation. Again, this is completely optional. The Bloomerang Zapier app is free to use. And so you may absolutely set up your automations on your own DIY, or if you have a team member or a volunteer who is technologically savvy and wants to try their hand in it, that's a great option as well. We just like to let you know that there is support out there. If you want someone to set up your automations for you, our team is available and we are happy to talk through any use case that you have. Now, it is important to note that your Zapier subscription is separate from this pricing. So if you were to reach out for the integration bundle, you do have to purchase Zapier separately. Now we're going to go ahead and launch a poll. Again, if you want to work with a consultant or you just have a use case or an automation need that you want to talk through with someone, feel free to let us know and we will follow up with you. Again, this is a free consult to talk through your automations and your organization's needs and see what is, what we can do to support you or answer what questions you have about the Bloomerang Zapier app. I know we're coming up on time here. Margie, did we have any questions we want to tackle? Or if anyone has any questions they want to submit now, I'm happy to stay on a few additional minutes as is needed.
Thank you, Jesse. Really appreciate that. We do have a couple of questions. Susan was asking earlier when we were talking about the event submissions. She said that, will that trigger work for all event submissions, or is it just that specific event?
Yeah, so Susan, the Jotform triggers and most form app triggers are based on a single specific form. If you're looking for an automation that will trigger for every event registration, that's typically looking at some type of an event registration platform like Eventbrite, RegFox, TicketSpice, something like that. But if you're looking to use just like a data collection form, a Google form, Jotform, something like that for event registrations, generally you have to set up the automation, one zap per form. So if the form can be reused year over year, you wouldn't need to rebuild your automation. You might just need to change some of your coding. But I guess the answer is yes, it is specific to a form that you've set up. And if that form is for a single event, then it is one automation per form.
Great, thank you. Another question we had, one from Barb, she asked, are you able to map forms so that you can collect data from either companies or individuals?
Yes, Barb, great question. So the Bloomerang Zapier app does have functionality to also support, searching for or creating organization accounts in Bloomerang. So there is some use of paths, so like branching paths in Zapier that can be used, or setting up separate automations for the form submitted by an individual versus the company. So the functionality is there. It's a little bit more advanced, so we didn't cover it on today's webinar. But to answer your question, yes. And if you have questions about that, again, happy to get a consult scheduled and talk through that with you so you understand how that process works.
Great. And then we did have, Megan had a specific use question that she was wanting to look for information for. And I just wondered, what are the steps if somebody has, let's say they're trying to set up a Zap and they want to make sure, somebody even said in here, I don't want to make a data mess in my Bloomerang database. Is there, are there steps they can take to have someone help them walk through that process so that they make sure that they're doing it correctly or getting assistance on how to do it?
Yeah, so that would be where, again, you can reach out to our team and we can talk about what support level you'd need, whether you want to try DIY and, do just some consulting to make sure you get any questions you have answered, or if we talk through your use case and you decide you'd like our team to just build it for you, there's options available on both sides. I would say let's start with a consult and see where your needs lie. But it absolutely is something where, again, our team has a variety of different support options to meet whatever need or stage you're at.
Great. And then Marissa was asking, when you say one Zap, does that mean one automation?
Yeah, so in Zapier, again, for any of you that are on here, if you haven't watched we have a Bloomerang Zapier 1-on-1 and a Bloomerang Zapier 201 that are in Bloomerang Academy. If you haven't watched those before, I recommend watching those, as they do clarify some of these common Zapier terms. But an automation or a Zap in Zapier, let me go back to one here as an example. So this is considered right here, this flow is considered a Zap or a single flow or automation. So if you had 4 different event registration forms set up in Jotform, you would need the flow set up 4 times, once for each of those forms, because the triggers and Jotforms and most form apps are specific to a single form.
Great, thank you. Marissa says thank you as well.
Awesome.
I don't see any other questions in here. But I want to say, Jesse, thank you so much for all of this information. I know that it was a lot, and it goes quickly. And Jesse, you're getting kudos for being an amazing instructor. One thing I would recommend, though, is we do have information on Zapier in our knowledge base. You can tap into that. You can tap into the information that's on the Zapier site as well, and then come back and revisit this webinar, because I think sometimes seeing those kind of the basics and then revisiting this, because you'll have this recording later today, that might help really ground this information for you. So I would just highly recommend that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, if you want, again, Margie, I believe you've already saved in there. In the Bloomerang Academy, there's that recording of the 101 and the 201 Zapier webinars. If you're going to dive into building some Zaps yourself, they walk you through each of the components in the Bloomerang Zapier app in greater detail, and will likely provide some additional clarification beyond what we did today.
And you know what, Jess, you're bringing up a good point. I'll make sure that we provide the links to those in the follow-up email. That way it's just all accessible to you in one spot.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessie. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you to all of you who attended today. We wish you all the best. I hope 2023 is going well for you. And Jessie, we can't wait to see you again on another webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Margie. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week.
Yeah, everyone take care. Bye-bye.